Okay, so I've been asked to give a brief analysis of the election results, the Israeli general election results, which were last week. Um, this is now our third election in 1 year, which is totally unprecedented. It has never happened in the history of the state of Israel, even though there is some instability built in to the Israeli representative democracy system. There's never been a situation like this before. And I'll just say briefly that the main reason why there have now been three elections is that there's a perception that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is specifically interested in achieving a bloc, a governing majority that would support legislation that would save him from trial. He is meant to go on trial starting March 17th, very soon, for three cases, the most serious of which involves bribery, which has significant jail time. And there's a belief that he would try to, if he was able to get 61 members of Knesset in the what's known as the right wing slash ultra orthodox parties, then he would try to pass legislation that would basically save him from his legal fate. On the other hand, the anti-Netanyahu parties, which are not necessarily all left-wing parties, they're kind of a hodgepodge of different perspectives, are all anti-Netanyahu. That's kind of the one thing that unifies them. And they're all anti-corruption in the sense that they would not join any government that would have the purpose of advancing legislation that would save Netanyahu. And they've all basically made election promises, both in this past election and the previous one, that they would not sit in a coalition that was run by a prime minister who has been indicted, and he was indicted after the previous election, after the September election. I believe it was at the end of November. So he ran this election, Netanyahu, as someone who was indicted, which is actually legal according to Israeli law, even though if you were indicted, you're not allowed to be a minister. You're not allowed to be a foreign minister or a defense minister. You can be a prime minister according to a basic law, which is quite maybe counterintuitive, but that's what the law is. So that's kind of the reasoning behind this insane cycle of elections, where basically the only possibility, neither bloc can really achieve a majority, it seems, and national unity government, although it was attempted after the last election, did not really succeed because of the fact that the main competition to Netanyahu's Likud party, the blue and white party, would not sit under, would not take part in a government, even a rotation prime ministership, in which Netanyahu, who has an indictment, or three indictments actually, would serve as prime minister. So last week, last Monday, March 3rd, which was the day of the election, that the exit poll results actually showed close to a majority victory for Likud and the parties that support Likud, that support Netanyahu's party. We saw exit polls that gave them 60 seats, and many analysts and journalists were predicting that it would go up to 61 and that Netanyahu would be able to receive his majority needed in order to pass the legislation that he wanted. Within 2 days, these numbers changed, and the actual results show that of the 120 Knesset seats, this pro-Netanyahu bloc only had 58 seats, whereas the anti-Netanyahu bloc had 62 seats, which is led by the blue and white party, Benny Gantz. So there's a bit of a difference between these two blocks, which is very, very important. The right-wing ultra-Orthodox bloc is quite unified, all supporting of Netanyahu, whereas the anti-Netanyahu bloc is much more problematic because it is not clear that all of these parties would support Benny Gantz to be prime minister. So the one small party that's kind of been the balance of power in each of these elections is called the Israel Beitenu, or Israel Our Home Party, which is actually a Russian immigrant party led by Avigdor Lieberman. In the September election, he didn't support either candidate for prime minister, and now it appears that he will support Benny Gantz. So even though he's right wing, the fact that he is running on a secular platform, an anti-religious platform, has moved him closer to Benny Gantz's side, and now he is part of this. Lieberman's party appears to be part of this 62 member of Knesset bloc that is the anti-Netanyahu bloc. However, this bloc is very divided. Lieberman is right-wing in his political or diplomatic and security approach, and very anti-Arab as well. And a major part of this bloc, of this anti-Netanyahu bloc, is what's called the Joint Arab List, which is a party that has grown significantly over each of these three elections. Now they're at 15 seats. And the idea that Lieberman's party could cooperate with the Joint Arab List, and he calls them terrorists and fifth column and all this kinds of incitement type rhetoric, it would be very difficult to see these two parties cooperating in a coalition, or even supporting a coalition from the outside, which is maybe an easier solution to this. So this situation resulted at first in Likud, which had this 58, saying we could maybe entice 3 members of this other bloc to what's called jump ship, and maybe join Likud or set up an independent party, basically by bribing them with various portfolios. But it doesn't appear that this is going to happen. It appears that the blocs are quite solid in terms of you have 58 supporting Netanyahu, 62 anti-Netanyahu. I don't say 62 pro-Gantz because that's not necessarily the case. So it appears that there are really 3 scenarios right now, 3 possibilities. One is that Likud and the Blue and White Party, led by Gantz, would form a national unity government that may include other parties. Between the two of them, they have enough seats to have a stable coalition, but they could include other parties. I believe that the likelihood of this is extremely low. It was attempted after the last election, after the September election, unsuccessfully. The main reasons why I think this would not happen is that I don't think that Blue and White Party, Kachol Lavan Party in Hebrew, could renege on its election promise not to sit under a Netanyahu government. And because Likud got more seats than the Blue and White Party, I don't think that Netanyahu would allow Benny Gantz to be the first prime minister if there was a rotation agreement. So, and the second reason I don't think that a national unity government would be possible is that both sides, but more specifically Netanyahu and Likud, ran such an ugly campaign that was full of incitement and hatred, such a negative campaign, that it seems that on a personal level, there is no real possibility for cooperation. Just to give you an idea, the Likud campaign was basically questioning Benny Gantz's sanity, questioning his psychological capacity to run the country, even inventing various stories that he had an affair with a woman who was an activist in the party, and all kinds of really nasty stuff over social media. On the other hand, blue and white were no angels themselves. One of their main gimmicks in the election was basically saying that if Netanyahu is reelected, he's going to turn Israel into Turkey, and they kept comparing Netanyahu to Erdogan in terms of specifically all of the action that Erdogan has taken against the legal authorities, against judges, against the police, and so forth. So there's a lot of hatred between the two sides. I don't think that national unity is possible. A second possibility is fourth elections, which would be sometime in the autumn, in September or October. I personally believe that there's a low likelihood of this. I said that there was a low likelihood of repeat elections after the second election as well, and I was obviously proven wrong. But I believe that this time there would be so much public anger if a government wasn't formed, particularly at Blue and White Party. I think that it would probably be the end of the Blue and White Party, because they are a bit of a kind of a new fashionable party that could fall apart. There could be, I mean, the knives could come out because they went down in terms of the amounts of seats they got in the parliament and the Knesset this time. The party may not itself last, so it would appear that Benny Gantz has much more of an interest this time to prevent that from happening. Netanyahu could try to go for a fourth election, actually, where he would be basically campaigning while under trial. I don't know if he has the power to make that happen, since he only has 58 seats out of 120 in his bloc, and because national unity doesn't seem to be possible, which is maybe the most probable option, but very, very difficult, would be a minority government led by Benny Gantz. And this would be a government basically comprised of the Blue and White Party, the Lieberman Party, called Israel Our Home, the Labor Meretz Party, which used to be a massive electoral power and only has 6 seats, actually. Sorry, 7 seats, my mistake. And then this doesn't give them enough for 61. This is only 47, but they would receive support from the outside, from the Joint Arab List. There's no way that the Joint Arab List would join a governing coalition for various historical reasons, because of the continued occupation of the Palestinians. They don't seek out to be part of a Zionist government. However, there seems to be some kind of meeting of interests that might allow them to support this government from the outside, which would basically prevent no confidence motions and allow a minority government to pass certain legislation and to exist for a period. Again, this is also very dependent on Avigdor Lieberman, who is probably one of the most virulent anti-Arab politicians, in a way like giving up on this rhetoric, changing his tune, and basically deciding that for him it's more important to create a government and depose of Netanyahu than to continue with his very anti-Arab sentiments. So it would really require Lieberman to make this kind of ideological shift. He's always been part in some way of the right wing, even if he is a pragmatist and very much realpolitik, not necessarily an ideologue. So basically the question is does the hatred of Netanyahu and the desire to prevent a fourth election and to sort of move on from the period of Netanyahu having total control over the system, is that enough to create cooperation between these parties that are very different and definitely not necessarily natural partners. And this is the million-dollar question that I don't necessarily have the answer to. Also, within the Blue and White Party, which is actually a combination itself of three different parties, there is a right-wing flank of that party, which two of the members have said that they would not be willing to form a minority government that relied on the support of the joint Arab list. We'll see. Maybe they will be convinced or pressured into changing their tune. It's not quite clear. And basically, I think that the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, who could have done something very similar after the September election, even in a better position in terms of the number of seats he had, that is forming a minority government, it appears that he is now ready to do this very risky move, even though he wasn't ready to do it after the September election, because he's come to realize that he basically has no choice. The option of a national unity government doesn't seem to exist. There's no trust between Netanyahu and Gantz. And having a fourth election would probably end Benny Gantz's potential as a possible prime minister of Israel and a leader of a large party in the Israeli political spectrum. Now, the one sort of major change that's happened slowly over these three elections that's become, in a way, the deciding factor in this election is the electoral strength of the joint Arab list. Now, this is a very interesting party because this is actually, again, an amalgamation of four different Arab parties. One is a kind of a neo-communist party that is based on Jewish-Arab cooperation, one kind of a Palestinian nationalist party, one an Islamist party, and another kind of a more extremist anti-cooperation party called Balad, who may not actually support Benny Gantz from the outside. Now, one of the reasons that this party received 15 seats in this election, it has risen with each election by a few seats. One of the reasons is because Netanyahu's election campaign was very much based on inciting against this Arab public. He kept on saying that Gantz, if elected, will form a government with the support of terrorist supporters and calling them a fifth column and all of this kind of thing, basically delegitimizing them as full citizens of the state of Israel. They are citizens, they vote, they are not part of the Zionist public. So Netanyahu, in a way, tries to delegitimize them and has continued to delegitimize them after the election campaign as well. So in a way, the fact that there was such high voter turnout in the Arab public, and that I believe something like 97% of the Arab public voted for this party, was kind of a response to this incitement to say, you're questioning our legitimacy as a voting public. We're going to come out in droves and make sure our voice is heard. And another issue is that the Arab public is now much more interested in being involved, to having their political representatives impact the political system, be part, if not part of a coalition, at least support it from the outside so that they can impact parliamentary decisions in terms of budgeting, in terms of law enforcement, and other issues that are very important to the Arab public. Another factor was the Trump deal of the century peace plan actually talked about changing the border of Israel so that some of the Arab towns and villages that are very close to the border with the West Bank would actually be transferred to the future state of Palestine. And this was viewed very negatively by the Arab public. And in a way, by coming out and voting, they were saying, we're part of the Israeli public. We vote, We want to have an influence in the Knesset. Now they have 15 seats of a Knesset of 120 seats. And actually, because of the way the proportional representation works in Israel, because there was such a high voter turnout in the Arab public, this had a kind of a key influence in the fact that the right-wing bloc went down and could not reach that threshold of 61 seats and only reached 57. If the Arab public had only voted, let's say, in 50% voter turnout, as opposed to around 70%, it's possible that the right wing would have been higher and Netanyahu would have gotten his 61 seat bloc. So it's a very complex picture right now. It's anybody's guess where it will end up. I think that there's a realization, probably for the first time, in the anti-Netanyahu bloc, the centrists, they're not necessarily left wing, the centrists, even moderate right, and the left wing, that the only way to form a government that is not a right-wing government is to have support, at least from the outside of the coalition, with the Arab public, which in a way I think is kind of a psychological barrier that needs to be broken in the left wing of Israeli society, that from a demographic perspective, the only way the left wing can actually restore power to itself, or the center and left wing, is through cooperation, through Jewish-Arab cooperation. Because demographically, among the Jewish Israeli public, the right wing and the ultra-Orthodox far outnumber the left wing. The only way is to really reach out to this 20% of the public, the Arab public in Israel, and create some kind of cooperation with this public. So we'll see within a few weeks where things lead. My guess is that there will probably, my guess is there will be a minority government with Benny Gantz as prime minister, but it's a very tricky situation. It's not 100% clear that this will happen. We'll have to wait and see. I hope this was informative, and I hope that we don't have another analysis a number of months from now where I'm talking about the results of the fourth election, because I do believe that would be quite detrimental to Israeli society. Thank you for listening.